Hello and welcome to another summary of what we looked at in church this morning in Ballymcgurney. And we're resuming looking at the life of Joseph. Last week was Remembrance Sunday. We took a little break from that, but we're turning back to the life of Joseph. And over the last number of weeks we've actually been looking at some aspects of Joseph's family. Thought about his wife Asenath a few weeks ago, and then we thought of how he dealt with his brothers as they returned back to Egypt and dealt with their consciences. Well, here in Genesis chapter 43, in our 10th study now, we're continuing on to look at Joseph's family, and we're thinking back now to one of his brothers, and we're thinking about his fourth eldest brother, Judah. And what we want to see here today is Judah growing up. Judah's now beginning to grow up and mature as an individual, here in Genesis 43 verses 1 to 10. And we'll just read verse 8 for the sake of time. Verse 8, Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live, and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones." Judah growing up. I heard the story of a coach tour. They were going on these various sites and so on, as these coach tours are wont to do. And they stopped off a little village just at the foot of a mountain. And as they stopped off at this village, and they're obviously looking at some historic sites and all in this coach trip, famous men, famous places and so on. And so they stopped off at this little village, and as they all got off the coach, went into the village, they were one of the ladies was talking to a local farmer. And she said to the local farmer, "Has there been any great men, any eminent men born or raised in this village or this little town?" And he said, "No, there were no men born in this village, just babies, just babies." And you know, it's so true. In the physical realm, the only person who was born mature was Adam. He was created as a mature man. The rest of us, whenever we're born, we are born as infants. And what is true of us physically is also true of us spiritually. Whenever an individual becomes born again, born into the family of God, they are not born spiritually mature, they are born spiritually immature. They are born as spiritual babies. And therefore, time and time again in the Bible, you will read of calls or challenges to Christians, to believers, to grow in their faith. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 18, we are to grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Saviour Jesus Christ. Ephesians 4:15 speaks about growing up into Him who is the head, speaking of Jesus Christ. We're to grow up into Jesus Christ. And here in this chapter, I believe we get a wonderful picture of someone who's beginning to grow up. We get a picture of Judah, one of Joseph's brothers, as I have said, and we find him maturing. We find him developing in his Christian experience. In this chapter, the brothers had previously been in Egypt, as we saw a few weeks ago, and Joseph had dealt with them, dealt with their consciences and so on. And they have now returned back home to Canaan with corn. But they had to leave Simeon, one of the brothers, back in Egypt, in prison. Joseph didn't show who he was, so they still see him very much as the governor of Egypt. They don't see him as Joseph, our long-lost brother. And in how Judah deals with this whole incident, as he speaks to his father Jacob, as he requests that Benjamin go back with them to Egypt, as he deals with the very fact that Jacob is heartbroken, and so on, as Judah deals with this very, very delicate situation, I think we see here a picture of Judah growing up. We see a picture of an individual who's maturing and developing in grace, who's growing in grace. Child of God, I ask you today, are you growing? Are you growing up in Jesus Christ? Christ has not saved you to remain a spiritual child. He has not saved you to remain a spiritual baby even. He has saved you so that you can progress, so that you can develop into a young Christian, so to speak. It doesn't matter your physical age. develop into spiritual adolescence, and even spiritual maturity. If you've been saved 20, 30, 40 years, child of God, you should not be a spiritual infant any longer. Christ has saved you to develop, to grow. In the natural realm, if an individual was 15, but they were still resembled a baby or were behaving like a baby, you would think there's something seriously wrong with that individual. And it's the same spiritually. Christ has saved us to grow up into Him and to develop. As you read in even the book of Hebrews, go on to perfection, go on to completion, mature in your Christian life. So I want to just see these pictures today of the life of Judah, in Genesis chapter 43, the first 10 verses, and see Judah growing up. The first thing I want to leave with you is Judah's initial depiction. His initial depiction, because as you are confronted by Judah in the Bible, you begin to see this initial picture of him as not a mature individual at all. Let me take you back to Genesis chapter 37. The incidents where we see Joseph and his brothers, and Joseph being thrown into the pit, and eventually sold to the hands of slave traders, Midianite slave traders. The individual who suggested that Joseph, rather than killing him, be sold to the Midianite slave traders was Judah, not exactly covering himself in glory. The next chapter, in chapter 38, you read of Judah in the opening 10 verses of marrying an unbeliever, not marrying a Jew, marrying outside the Commonwealth of Israel or of Canaan, marrying an unbeliever and actually having children by her. The names of these children are Er and Onan. And sadly, these individuals, they grow up to be individuals of Belial, wretches of individuals. And God actually comes and strikes these two lads down. They're so wicked. The story doesn't stop there with Judah. In Genesis 38, Judah sadly loses his wife as well. And so what you see Judah here, he is experiencing trial, he's experiencing tragedy. But in Genesis 38, you have the unfortunate incidents of Tamar. Because you read of in Genesis 38, after losing his wife and losing his sons, Judah, he decides to commit adultery with his daughter-in-law. Now, he doesn't know it at the time. He thinks she's a harlot. She has dressed herself up. But what I want you to see, without getting into all the details of it, is here's Judah, and he is showing that he's a very, very immature individual in his lack of patience, firstly, in marrying an unbeliever, but secondly, in how he deals with this whole situation. He has suffered bereavement, which your heart goes out to Judah, but this is no excuse for him dealing with those circumstances in the manner that he does. He loses his wife. He loses his children. Sadly, he deals with it in a very, very immature and a very, very ungodly manner, by simply satisfying his own emptiness and his own hollowness, and satisfying and gratifying those desires in the form of an adulterous relationship with a harlot. What I want you to see here then is an individual who is quite reckless, an individual who simply goes to pieces, an individual who does not deal with the hardships and the changes of life in a manner that is befitting of a Christian at all. He doesn't deal with it very well. He deals with it in a very, very impatient and a very, very petulant manner. Child of God, what I want you to see is this. Very often trials and changes in life, rather than make you as a Christian, they actually simply reveal what's inside. And perhaps how you've dealt with situations in the past just simply shows where you are spiritually. We all suffer hardship. Some of us suffer bereavement, like Judah. Some of us suffer difficulties that we all will suffer at times from changes in our lives. Life is changeable. That's just the nature of life. And especially in COVID-19, things change for us all the time. But my friend, it's how you actually deal with the stuff of life and the nitty-gritty in life when the rubber hits the road so to speak. How often you deal with those situations reveal the strength of your faith and reveal how mature a believer you actually are. And perhaps you can look back to times in your life where perhaps it has been a bereavement, but maybe it's just more generally that there's been a hardship come, a trial has come your way, and perhaps you haven't dealt with it in the manner of Judah, I trust not, but perhaps you've dealt with it in a reckless manner. You've got angry, you've went off the rag, as we would say in Ulster here. You haven't dealt with a change or a sudden adverse providence in your life. You haven't dealt with it well. Perhaps you've been like Judah. Perhaps this initial depiction of the life of Judah is just a picture of where you are at now and how you've dealt even with COVID, or where you've been at previously. I think at this stage it's good for me to point out to those who maybe are more spiritually mature believers, or feel that they're spiritually mature believers. Sometimes you can expect more of a young Christian than is unreasonable. Sometimes a young Christian, they're just saved 2, 3, 4 years, and you see them going down a path and it's not a right path. Sometimes it can be the tendency of an old Christian to come down hard on that Christian for making a mistake or being reckless. But that's not perhaps the best course of action. Often the best course of action, if you see a young Christian, whether they be young spiritually or young physically, it's just simply to be there for them and gently explain to them how reckless they have been. You expect certain things of a child. You expect a certain recklessness from a little baby. We have 2 girls, 3 and 1, and you expect certain things of them. That a child is a child, and it's the same spiritually. We can't expect too much of a Christian that is unreasonable if they've only been saved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So the initial depiction of Judah is that he is quite reckless in dealing with the hardships of life. But thank God that he doesn't stay there, because we have the initial depiction of Judah. I want you then in this chapter now, in chapter 43, to see secondly the thoughtful desire of Judah. His thoughtful desire. In verses 4 and 5, we read, "If thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go down and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said unto us, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you." Whenever they were in Egypt the first time, and Joseph deals with their consciences and so on, Joseph obviously knows who his brothers are, but they don't know who he is. He hasn't revealed himself to them yet. So Joseph, he gives them corn. Remember, there's a famine now. He gives them corn and he sends them home. But he sends them home on one condition: that whenever they return next, that they bring Benjamin back with them. They mention in the course of the conversation they have another younger brother. He knows fine well it's Benjamin. Benjamin and him were close. They had the same mother. He has this affinity with Benjamin. Benjamin is, of course, his younger brother. And he says, look, the next time you come, don't come except you bring Benjamin. And that's why Simeon is kept. He's kept essentially as collateral in prison. Look, you don't bring Benjamin, then you're not going to get Simeon back. That's what he's saying to them. Simeon remains then in Egypt with Joseph, as I have said. So Judah is now relaying all of this to his father, Jacob. Now put yourself in Jacob's shoes, his position. He has lost Joseph. He's never really recovered from that. 20 years he's been in mourning. Simeon now has been left in Egypt. There's another son left in Egypt. Perhaps he thinks he'll never see Simeon again. Yes, they have got corn, but now the brothers are asking for Benjamin to come as well. You could understand Jacob here in his unwillingness to let Benjamin go. But eventually circumstances transpire. They eat all of the corn that has been given to them by Joseph. And here's Judah now. And I want you to see that Judah, he has this thoughtful desire. He is very thoughtful here in his outlook, because Judah is the 4th oldest son here, but Judah ends up taking the lead. And he presents really the facts to his father Jacob. He says, look, the first thing he says is, look, we need food. So I want you to see that Judah here is not thinking about himself any longer. He's thinking about his other brothers. Now, it's not really his position, it's the position of the firstborn to do this. But he's taking on that mantle. Look, we all need food. So his concern is not for himself now. He is also thinking about Simeon, who's left in Egypt. He doesn't want to see his brother left in prison. He has lost one brother already. He's lost Joseph in his mind. He doesn't want to lose another one. He also realizes that Jacob is distraught as well. So in how he handles this, he's showing here that he is no longer the self-serving individual that he once was. He is concerned about others. He's also concerned about doing the right thing, because Joseph has made the request, look, if you're going to come down again, bring Benjamin. So I want you to see here in the thoughtful desires of Judah, he's thinking about others, but he is also wants to do the right thing. And in this instant, in these verses 4 and 5, you see someone who's maturing in their faith. These two things, I believe, these two qualities are an indication of Judah's progression in his faith, in his Christian life. He's not thinking about himself anymore, he's thinking about others. He's not self-serving. It's not me, and what I can get, and what I can possess myself, and what I can do for myself. It's my family, it's my father, it's my brothers. We're all hungry here. Someone needs to do something about it. And he also wants to do the right thing by the leader in Egypt as well. Child of God, these two areas in your life are ways in which you show that you're developing and maturing as a Christian. The world, unfortunately, it's so self-serving. You are bombarded in the media every day of your life. Look, do what makes you happy. It's all about you. It doesn't matter about anybody else. It's all about you. Now, we do need to be happy. We need to be content. But at the same time, beloved, the Bible clearly commands that we are to love our neighbour as ourselves. And when an individual begins to realise this and actualise this and apply this in their life, this is when you begin to see them spiritually develop and spiritually mature. And I ask you very pointedly today, are you showing these marks of grace in your life? Will you realise that the world's far bigger than you? Far bigger than your circumstances and your problems and your trials? That there are other individuals out there and they need your help? Perhaps this is just a challenge to you today, that to be less self-serving and more aware of others. Judah here, 20 years have passed between this initial depiction and now where he's at, and he's definitely maturing as an individual. Can you say you're maturing? Can you say that there is a concern in your heart for others? Yes, in evangelism, the Bible tells us in Jude we're to have compassion and make a difference. We're to pull others from the fire. That's what Jude tells us at the end of his epistle. But this is one of the wonderful ways in which you can actually show that you're a Christian, in just that attitude of service, servitude, serving others. 1 Corinthians 10:24 tells us we are to seek another man's wealth and not our own. You say this today, child of God? And can you say that it's your desire to do the right thing? Way back, you remember, this was Joseph's desire in Genesis 37. He was just 17, but he was a far more mature individual than his brothers. That's why he got the coat of many colours, as we saw. Judah, the penny's beginning to drop now with Judah. Life's not all about me. There are other people with far bigger problems than me. And I need therefore to love others as I love myself, and to try and do what I can to help them, to provide for them, to encourage them, to strengthen them. You say these graces are evident in your life. So Judah's initial depiction and Judah's thoughtful desire. Lastly, here in Genesis 43, I want you to see his humble declarations. His humble declarations. Verses 8 and 9, Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me. We will arise and go that we may live and not die. Both we, thou also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. Judah essentially promises to be surety for his brother Benjamin. Says to his father, look, I tell you what, we'll all go down to Egypt and I will be a surety for Benjamin. If something happens, Benjamin, you can lay all of the fault on me, Dad. You can place all of those faults. If something happens, Benjamin, I am now personally undertaking to to make sure that Benjamin's fine. And if he's not, you can blame it all on me. And in chapter 44, as they then go down to Egypt, you see Judah, and he comes before Joseph. And what does he do? He confesses his own personal guilt to Joseph, and he also confesses the collective guilt of the family to Joseph as well. He bows before Joseph. Whenever Joseph is still proving Judah, and he wants to see how authentic he really is, Judah even offers to step in and go to prison on behalf of Simeon as well. So here, even in these verses and in the next chapter, Judah, he is further developing. In his declaration here, he is now saying, look, if needs be, I'll take the very place of Benjamin and of Simeon. And in his humble submission to Joseph and his confessing his wrongdoing and his guilt, he's showing further development, further maturity in his Christian life. And child of God, the challenge is there, and it rings loud and clear in all of our ears. This is how you again show that you're further progressing and maturing in grace. When you realise, look, that there are times when you get it wrong and you say sorry. Times when you confess guilt, not merely to God but to man. And you seek to live in harmony with men. The Bible tells us, look, we need to live in harmony with others as far as is possible. This is one of the ways in which we display righteousness to the world. We are not to render evil again for evil, but we are to return evil for good. And here's Judah now, he's seeking to mend all of the wrongdoings of the past. He's seeking to mend them all. And he's saying, look, if you want proof of this, I'll take the place. I'll be surety for my brother. And of course here in Judah maturing and being a more whole and more full individual, and offering to be a surety for Benjamin, you see a wonderful picture of Christ, don't you? Christ was the complete man. Christ took upon himself the guilt of individuals, all of his people. He was a mature man. He did good. Acts 10:38 tells us he went about doing much good. How is it you're going to mature like Judah? Christ is your ultimate example. He is your surety. Hebrews 7:22. He is the surety of a better testament. He is the one who undertakes to fulfill all the obligations of the law for his people. He takes the punishment, the place of his people. And even in the righteous life that he lived, there you have all that is necessary to stimulate you, to motivate you, to encourage you, to pursue maturity, completion, to be complete in him. I trust today that you're just seeking to grow up in Jesus Christ, and that as we have traced some of the development of Judah here, that it's an encouragement to you to grow up in the Christian faith. May God bless you and help you to progress with him.